science, environmental, agricultural journalist with the multimedia family and currently pursuing a PhD in agricultural education at North Carolina State University in the United States of America. This is Springboard, your virtual university. My guest is Joseph Opoku Gakpo.
I started journalism at a very young age. I was less than 18 years. It was like 6 or 7 months to my 18th birthday in the newsroom of Capital Radio in Kumasi. That was in 2008. Erastus Asaredonko was the editor there. I was virtually fresh from high school. The real breakthrough came when I had the opportunity to do an internship at
Springboard is brought to you by the Springboard Roadshow Foundation and proudly sponsored by MTN Ghana and the Enterprise Group with media support from the Multimedia Group and the Graphic Communications Group. So we continue our exciting conversation about finding yourself. What does it take to find who exactly you are as an individual? What are the milestones on that journey? When do you decide that you've gone in one direction long enough and there's a need to re-navigate your way in another direction? Joe, good to see you.
Ocran, good to see you. It's been a while.
Yes,
if I could describe it as such.
I suspect the last time I saw you, you had just received one of your numerous awards. It must be the MTN one, was it?
Yes, so that was the MTN Heroes of Change Award in 2018, I think. Well, that wasn't the last time we actually
Yes,
met.
but that was
the
the
last time we actually
notable
had a conversation.
Yes. And I was, because I'm on the panel of judges, I remember that one very, very well because it was yourself, Manasseh, and Seth Kwame, three great friends of mine.
Yeah.
How does it feel when you get recognized for your work?
It's usually very inspirational. I'm more often than not very clear in my mind that the work that we do, the main motivation is those who end up benefiting from it eventually. So some of the stories that we focus on telling, particularly those that focus on rural development, we want to tell the stories of the ordinary people with the hope that some intervention would come, whether it's about underdevelopment, whether it's about communities facing developmental challenges and all, that someone would intervene when some of those challenges are resolved. So that's usually the biggest fulfillment when we tell some of those stories. But when there is the additional bonus, when an award comes in, then it gives the sense that at least others are also looking at the work that you're doing, and it obviously encourages you to want to do a bit more.
Does it increase your credibility in the eyes of external stakeholders and by extension your value?
It obviously does. From experience, we've seen instances of you having conversations with people internationally, and before they get into those conversations, they've probably done a Google search on you. They've seen work that you've done and awards that you've won from MTN, from the International Federation of Agricultural Journalists. And when it happens like that, you walk into some of those spaces, even internationally, into conversations with a very confident posture, because then, yes,
I like that confident posture.
those you are dealing with are clear in their minds that this is someone who's made a huge difference in his own country, even before getting into some of those engagements. So yes, it obviously increases your credibility.
So you're currently doing a PhD in agricultural education.
Yes.
In the USC.
Yes.
Obviously, you've taken it to the next level from when you began to show interest in agric as an area of specialization, more or less, including, of course, rural development and all the adjacencies.
Yeah.
What does it take to pin something down and say, this is me? I mean, I'm sure you went to either the School of Journalism or GIG or read comms in the university or began as a practitioner, but how do you begin to navigate where this will go?
So more often than not, I think when you begin to see the area that you are making a lot more impact in, and you are seeing a situation where in that particular instance, the rewards and the returns, not financially, but in terms of the difference that's made in the lives of ordinary people is higher. I think that's what would usually drive you in terms of where you would want to then pin down as your area of interest. So classical example, I did parliamentary reporting as well in the duration that I was actively practicing. My boss used to make the point that he says they say journalism really don't go anywhere. So then the NDC folks, the MPP folks come sit on radio and have that broad conversation around the everyday political issues. It actually makes no huge impact, but you step out with your camera, get down to Zabzugu Tatale somewhere up north, go tell the story of a community there that's struggling to process or get their yam out of the farming enclave to the markets up north or even here in Accra. And then once that story is told, some individual, some business person, some international NGO that support farming community steps in to then go help the community with processing materials and all of that. When you do those things and you tell some of those stories and you see that huge impact that it's making, it motivates you to a very large extent to then want to say, okay, this is something that I would want to dedicate a bit more energy to, dedicate a bit more time to, dedicate a bit more attention to, and hope to make that bigger impact. Because then, yes, that larger return of changing the lives of the people will spur you on to want to do more when it comes to that.
Help me to appreciate, in terms of impact, or what you may want to call returns, which one gets the bigger results? Is it news items? Is it documentaries? And if so, what is the turning point? Is it the emotional appeal? Help us to appreciate the engine room of your work.
So I think what actually touches the heart of people more often is the voice of the ordinary people. So it's possible, for example, to tell a story about agriculture in the studios of Joy FM with a bunch of agricultural experts from the University of Ghana and maybe some other individual running an agricultural export value chain who travels across Europe and does business within the agricultural space as someone who is very much high up there. But when an agriculture story is told from the perspective of the ordinary farmer, with the appropriate ambience in the background, we are seeing the nitty-gritties of what exactly happens on the farming field. We are seeing what exactly happens in the farming communities. And it's not just a case of reported speeches in terms of people who probably have learned agriculture only in the classroom, sitting in the studio as experts having that conversation. When that conversation is happening with that very authentic voice of the real people doing the work as agricultural folks, I think that's where the real emotional appeal then eventually come in. And for me, over the years, I've seen the excitement in telling stories, for example, from some of those communities, and the rural folks sometimes just seeing themselves on television and giving you a call to say, yes, we saw the story. And that's even more than enough joy as someone living in one village somewhere behind Ho or somewhere there, as against the politician who probably takes some of these for granted more often than not.
Do you sometimes feel that in the whole developmental construct and the design and the dynamics, the real people that we are supposed to be designing for, developing strategy for, are not at the centerpiece of the conversation?
That's obviously a big deal. And a bit of what I'm studying in the US actually centers around that. So agricultural education, agricultural extension, the point about the need to ensure that when you are developing programs aimed at empowering local communities, make sure that they are very much at the center of the conversation. And there are various processes in terms of trying to then get that done. So we've seen situations where all over the world, institutions hoping to engage in rural developmental activities put up calls for proposals from other smaller NGOs or foundations and all. These experts, as you would call them, operating in the development space will probably be in their offices, draft a program aimed at improving the lot of rural community folks, sometimes without even consulting these individuals that we are directing some of these initiatives at. So when it happens like that, you eventually get into the community with the idea and you get a lot of pushback. Sometimes not even about a concern that they don't like the initiative that you are bringing, but then there are some socio-cultural settings that then are supposed to then facilitate some of those initiatives. Recently, a friend was telling an interesting story of a community where an NGO went in there, dug a borehole with the idea that they would have clean water. So they ceased drinking from the stream. And guess what happened? No one was fetching from the borehole. And the main concern was that the borehole was sitting in the heart of town. The women who actually go to do the water fetching, they would want to have the opportunity to interact and gossip as they take that 15-minute stroll all the way to the riverside. And here you are, you've come to construct the borehole in the middle of the community. So that opportunity for communal connection no longer exists. If they have their way, they will ignore the borehole and still drink from the stream. And you cannot get some of these dynamics if you don't speak to the people themselves.
I'll tell you one other one that was very interesting. So in a similar vein, there's this group of experts that went into a community ostensibly having studied the soil and thinking, but it should be very easy. Just plant watermelons here, and that should be cool. And as they were talking and progressing, the community people just kept smiling. They didn't talk. So these experts went ahead, planted watermelons, and anytime they took pictures of the watermelons, we were asking them, but it was so obvious, why didn't you see it? And the people just smile. Then the week before the harvest, rhinos came out of the river, went straight and consumed all the watermelons, went back into the river, and guess what? The community people just smiled again.
Of course.
If only you would ask,
you
will tell you where to look.
Exactly.
I'll tell you what, in our engagement with MasterCard Foundation, the design of the Ghana Growth Program that we are working on for opportunities in agriculture, agribusiness, and ATVET. We spent 2 years talking to the people who are doing the actual work. Even though it's a mindset change program, focus groups with them, community engagement, and then we'll go and do case studies of what is happening elsewhere, come back to the communities again. And largely, it was the young people that the program was being designed for who were at the forefront of the conversations, the design. And Joseph, it helped me to appreciate to an even greater extent that when we sometimes make those sweeping statements about the young people not being ready, not being interested, it is just a small fraction of the story. This whole program was designed by young people without supervision.
That's obviously why the impact is being felt, and the young people are embracing it because then they very much were involved. Just a sidebar, I'm really excited about my good friend Araba Kumsin, my editor, if I could put it so, being involved in that initiative as well. And
incredible as they travel around the country.
The level of excitement on the part of herself and the other folks involved in this initiative, that's really a very inspirational bit. And so that obviously provides an appropriate template that other developmental institutions need to pay attention to in terms of rolling out various initiatives. That you need to get the communities involved, you need to get them involved right from program development up until program implementation and all. And that's how come you'd see the appropriate difference. Otherwise, we'll just be pouring water on stone.
Wow. And then the other thing that we also learned is youth voice, which you rightly indicated that in the presentation of ideas and everything, when the young people for whom it is being done and who are the centerpiece of the conversation speak on a video from the community about something, they may not even speak the nice Harvard English or North Carolina English that you and I will speak, but it resonates so well. And it's part of the values of the partner that we work with.
So there's research that points to the fact that when people see themselves in the individuals who are communicating to them or introducing new technology to them, that makes a huge impact and positively impacts chances of adoption of that technology. So there's a lot of, and that's why there's a lot of conversation around the need for diversity in the rolling out of various initiatives. Again, one of the things that I've paid attention to in my studies.
So in settling on agriculture and rural development, among others, as your areas of interest, how did the journey flow? I mean, of course, you began to do stories on them, and then what next?
So it's It actually dates back to my days as a university student
Really?
at the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology. So my first degree was actually in agricultural biotechnology from the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology. Then I moved on to the University of Ghana to then do a master's in communication studies. And so then when I first got into the newsroom and began journalism, the practice of journalism, I was very clear in my mind that I would want to have a plan that then seeks to place a bit more emphasis on agriculture. And I was very clear in my mind that that's an area that would have very good use of my expertise in terms of me reporting on issues generally. Of course, everyone can report on everything from archaeology to zoology. But as someone who had spent some time studying agriculture for 4 good years, and the thinking was that I was stepping out of the agriculture space because I was getting into media practice, I was determined not to allow everything that I had learned at Cairn University, focusing on agriculture, to go to waste. And so I would need to find a way to get that to then feature in the kind of news reportings that I do, which was what motivated me to pivot in that direction, expanded on it to then focus on issues of environment. And then, of course, agriculture and environment intersects a lot with rural development because majority of our farming folks are in the rural area. So then that became a whole broad niche area that I then kind of specialized in.
So once you get into something, I want to believe that the reward, the motivation, something that comes out of it will sustain your continued interest. Ever since you got in, what are the things that have kept you in there saying, this is it?
The media in particular, the capacity that the media holds to then bring about change is something that I guess we've underestimated over the years. We've seen situations of wild things being done as a result of media reportage. My colleagues at Kwame Boateng Stories have sent folks who are in prison out of prison after God knows how many years. Manasseh Azuriawene has done stories about corruption and crime that has eventually sent people to prison and all. We've seen schools being built as a result of stories that other colleagues of mine have told, including one that I told in the Volta region about 6 or 7 years ago. We've seen communities getting solar panels, communities getting water, non-governmental organizations deciding to set up operations in communities as a result of journalists putting a spotlight on those communities. We've seen lives literally being saved because people were struggling and they needed some bit of financing for surgery and all, and the media helped do that. Those kinds of things are so developmental journalism, as it's usually described. For me, that's where the real reward is. When you tell the stories and see that kind of response, you don't see the reason to then stop telling those kinds of stories and being out there a bit more than you'd have loved to do for your comfort.
From the days of my good friend, the late Komla Dimo, the song about radio gets results, and by extension, media gets results, connects very much with what you're telling me. But the same platform or medium or media is also being used by other people in the name of journalism for other things that tend to put pressure on the practice, and from people who say nothing is happening in there. How do we amplify these beautiful stories that you tell so that the public can make a judgment on which one is the majority and which one is a minority or exception, as it were?
I think those using the media as a force for good need not give up, need not get tired of the kind of general feedback that then results in a backlash directed at media folks generally. As expected, every society would have its own bad nuts, as it's usually described. And over the years, as we've also seen, bad news sell. The things that draw negativity would usually gain much more attention than the things that draw positivity. But those doing the good need not grow tired in terms of trying to then get that done. And it, it, social media, to a very large extent, is also gradually veering into the space. We have citizen journalists, folks also telling their own stories. More often, the very rules of journalistic practice emphasizes the idea of gatekeeping, the point that you shouldn't sleep, wake up, and on your own get a story from producing it to putting it on the media platform. It would usually at least go through at least one or two editors in order to then go out there. At the level of social media, in terms to digital media, all that gatekeeping bit is lost and is being collapsed, and people will engage in citizen journalism sometime as well, not necessarily for the larger public good, but then to pursue specific agenda that will benefit them eventually. I think the way around it is those using the media as a force for good, not giving up and repeatedly highlighting the positive impact that the media will make. Over the years, the media will evolve into varying forms, but the very concept of let's put together ideas, let's put together a story and disseminate so other people get to know of it. It's a concept that will never die. It would evolve going forward and change into different forms. But that's the powerful thing in terms of our whole society, that we document good practices and expose others to it so they can also jump on it. We document positive stories, let people see it. We disseminate knowledge through the media. And yeah, that will live for a very long time to come.
Is this whole thing journalism, is it a science?
To a large extent, I'm clear in my mind that the practice of journalism specifically is a science. So when you think of what is described as the scientific method, the idea that in order to then produce knowledge, you should come up with a research question. Sometimes you'd have your own ideas and your biases on the framing of the research question, but then when you come up with a research question, you do data gathering and you synthesize the data and you report on what you find. That's what usually is described as the scientific method, sometimes using experimentation and all of that to then get to that. That's essentially what journalists do. That we would step out there, do interviews, put it together, try to frame it appropriately in a way that excites people. Sometimes you do 2 hours interview and end up bringing it down to a clip that's just about 3 or 4 minutes and then put out there. So we virtually use the same scientific process that everyday scientists use in trying to get through coming up with inventions and innovations. So yes, it's obviously a science.
I'm going to go for a break. When I come back, we'll talk about the critical success factors. If you want to win awards, if you want to do it well, what must you do? And then we also will veer into a conversation about agriculture as probably a stepping stone or a springboard, as it were, to responding to Africa's burgeoning youth population and high unemployment levels, using your experience both locally and internationally. This is Springboard, your virtual university. My guest, Joseph Opoku Gakpo, a good friend of ours here at Springboard, and he's part of the multimedia family, a journalist with a focus not just on agriculture, but also rural development and also on the environment. And he's pursuing a PhD in that area. He's here in town, and we are trying to pick his thoughts as we reflect on what it will take to not just find yourself, but even leverage agriculture as a big tool for transforming our nation and our continent. Let me remind you of our enterprise advantage tip of the day, and it relates to health insurance. Healthcare is one of the biggest conversations that anyone must have at any point in their lives. And the question about healthcare is related to Acacia Health Insurance. Do I always have to pay for medical services under the Acacia Health Insurance scheme and claim a refund later? And that is a question somebody is asking as we share our tip for the day. And the answer is an emphatic no. Members of the scheme are expected to use their cards at accredited service providers and avoid paying cash unless during an emergency. So if you have the Acacia card, You walk into any accredited service provider, healthcare service provider, and are cared for without paying any cash, unless you find yourself in an emergency. Then a refund becomes a conversation. This tip is brought to you by the Enterprise Group. The number to call to reach them, 030-263-4777. Email info@myenterprisegroup.io. Enterprise, your advantage. Let's go for a break. When we come back, is agri the key to solving Africa's unemployment? And if you are thinking about becoming a journalist and by extension a communications professional, what are the critical success factors according to Joseph Opoku Gakpo? Please don't go.
Hello? Bye.
Well, everybody's heard about the bird. Bird, bird is the word that will I. Bird is the word that will I. Don't you know about the bird? Well, everybody knows that the bird is the word that will I. Bird is the word.
To consider the implications.
Hello? Everybody knows that the bird is the word. When the bird,
Whether it's 1924, 2024, or 2124, we've always known that you are driven by your sense of safety and well-being. It is what drives us to see you through from start to finish, from small to big. And in the last 100 years, as you have evolved, so have we also expanded to serve you in many ways. From cradle to grave, with expertise in insurance, life, pensions, properties, health, and for those beautiful memorable goodbyes. It's 2024, and in all our markets, our pedigree is recognized, our strength respected, our expertise valued, and our solutions sought by all who desire an advantage in life. Experience the time-tested and truly trusted 100 years legacy of Ghana's oldest insurer. Take charge of your future now. Insurance, life, pensions, property management, funeral services, health insurance. Enterprise, your advantage.
This be me, Kobe, aka Kobe Boga, KB for short. And this is my sweetheart, Obahima. Today, I get big surprise for her. Charlie, gone are the days I couldn't spoil my girl. Now I'm engaged to the woman of my dreams. Don't just look at my success. To get here, I had to follow the process. Out of nowhere, I lost my job. But I believe in humble beginnings. I got an idea that I knew I could grow. I started from a small setup, then invested in growing my own coconuts. I then grew my product lines. Now, I sell to many supermarkets in the country. Fellow young Ghanaians, trust the process and keep hope alive.
Take advantage of agri-business through the Ghana Grows program. Ghana Grows, Hope Day.
Welcome back to Springboard, your virtual university, and to this incredible conversation about finding yourself with Joseph Opoku Gakpo. We have been touching on a bit of the science of journalism and also about this journey that began in agriculture and then swung into communications, came into the multimedia group, is in North Carolina, and everything on the milestones in between. Joseph, you've been sharing your story, and you seem to be very clear in your mind, or if I may say so, you seem to have found your niche very, very early, unlike some people who probably will find it only when they are at the tail end of their careers. How important is self-awareness in this journey of self-discovery? How important is knowing who you are and who you are not?
So, knowing who you are, that's obviously very critical. One of the things that I've come to realize over the years is one of the ways around hopefully trying to make a difference is coming to an understanding that as individuals, we live in a larger society. And as individuals, whichever way you look at it, we are just a microcosm of the larger society, both in terms of what the entire world and the universe generally looks like, and even in terms of the numerous people that we have on this earth. A journalist I admire a lot, David Brooks, who writes for the New York Times and appears on TV shows in the US PBS, said something in a book that he has, The Road to Character, about we as individuals in terms of the kind of things that drive us. He talks about resume virtues and he talks about eulogy virtues. So then he talks about resume virtues, which would usually center around the idea that the thing that we would usually put on our CV when you are looking for a job, we have good statistical skills, we have good organizational skills, we have good leadership skills and all of that. And then he talks about the second thing that helps build human beings, which are the eulogy virtues. So the thing that would usually be said at your funeral. So were you brave? Were you honest? Did you have integrity? Did you love people? Were you a caring person and all of that? And he makes the point that throughout our educational system, we have a situation where we are clearly directing young people and people who go through the educational system on how they can build the resume virtues. But then when it comes to the eulogy virtues, it's a little unclear how we encourage young people to then build those eulogy virtues. And in my mind, discovering yourself would usually center around that bit of those eulogy virtues, because then today we would usually tell young people that as a young person, look within yourself, look for the things that excite you, look for the things that tickle your spirits, look within and see those things that bring you joy and aim at that. Of course, that's obviously a good thing. But then the other bit is the larger society also has needs that attention needs to be paid to. So if you're a young person growing up in a community where there is no medical doctor, society will tell you, look within yourself. And if you think that you are excited about metals and fixing things, go for that and be an engineer. That's one bit of it. But can we also begin reorienting ourselves in a way that then says, should young people also begin looking within their communities and asking, what are the needs of the community that I think I can draw inspiration from and aim at building myself and appropriately position myself to be able to then help fix some of those needs? So the community has no medical doctor. Can that alone be an inspiration for you to then say, let me aim at probably going to study medicine and come back to the community and help provide healthcare to the people?
It's a tough conversation we are having because recent conversation with Myanmar Asian family, who, if in the multimedia family, is one of the pioneers of the stations. He mentioned that transactions don't pay. Even if they pay, you get the scrums. What really pays is doing things not just for the immediate gain, but building relationships, adding value. But I'm saying the average person you talk to is looking at the same thing you talked about. Yes, there's a need for a doctor, but they are going to do the medicine not to solve the societal problem, but to earn the cash. And that is I won't say the sole consideration, but that is the dominant consideration. How do you marry that and the seeming altruistic outlook that you have on life? Because it's not something that is I've known about. I just got to know about. I've known you all throughout your life to have a developmental orientation that does not seem to be profit or financial gain driven.
Yeah.
How do people like you get that kind of orientation? And so where then does your driver come from?
I think the motivation that says, when you look in that broader direction of helping deal with societal needs, thinking of life as something that's larger than yourself, putting yourself within a larger context of being development driven and all, the possible additional returns of financial rewards that would at least help you get going with life and be able to, get bread and butter and keep your family going will eventually come. Because then when you do that larger focus on the bigger things, I think that one way or the other, not just society, but not just society, but a larger authority up there that we all can't comprehend, that we all don't exactly understand. And in this case, I'm referring to God, also has his own way of rewarding those who prioritize those things that aim at improving the lives of ordinary people, rather than just focusing on the cash. So for me, that's where eventually the balance is.
Let me read the thoughts of Martin Luther King on this. He says, every man must decide whether he will walk in the light of creative altruism or in the darkness of destructive selfishness. It seems to summarize what we are saying, that when you focus on yourself so much, it can be destructive as compared to looking at the greater good of society. He continues to say that when you give back to others, you get so much more in return. Where do you find the patience to wait for that?
It's a very meritocratic society where the idea is that, we all working by the economic logic, input leads to outputs. When you practice, you become perfect, and all of that, which is fine. But then there's also what you could probably call the moral logic. So that broader idea that you need to surrender yourself to something larger in order to be able to then find yourself. The idea that givers never lack, and when you give, if you want to receive to a certain extent, give, because then when you give, then there's a high chance that you receive in return. You need to lose yourself to find yourself. So that's...
Are you influenced by your faith in all these conversations?
Obviously, that makes a huge difference in terms of believing in God and reading the Holy Scripture and picking bits of inspiration from that. That cannot be discounted.
So that's where you get the idea about denying yourself.
Yes, because then eventually the reward will come. So yeah, why not?
Let me go on to the critical success factors. If you want to be a good journalist, the kind that wins awards from international organizations, from where you sit, what are the keys to getting into that bracket?
Continuous learning. That's probably the most important key in terms of trying to then make that difference. In my own personal experience, I've always been clear in my mind that when it comes to journalism practice, I don't fully understand what's going on. At that point in time that I started practicing actively as a journalist, I hadn't really had any sound journalistic training. A lot of it was more of practical training and internships in, following the lead of others who've been there. And even after I had the opportunity to then pursue academic training in journalism, I was still very clear in my mind that there is more to it than just what you've read in the books. So yes, continuous learning is obviously what does the trick. Having people that you would want to look up to and say that I'm excited about how these individuals get the work done, so let me probably follow their lead.
Who influenced or mentored you the most?
Let me start with the influence bit. There are 3 journalists who come to mind that I pay attention to their work a lot. I mentioned one of them earlier, David Brooks, who writes for the New York Times in the US. Fareed Zakaria, who works with CNN, who's Fareed Zakaria GPS, and Manasseh Azria-Wene is also one of those journalists that I have very strong admiration for. There's one thing that runs across all 3 of them. They don't just do journalism in a way that's we would want to report things that we hear and then walk our way. They are virtually involved in activism when it comes to the kind of journalism that they do. So Fareed Zakaria writes a lot of opinion pieces, just as David Brooks. He writes a lot of books hitting on key subjects. Manasseh does a lot of activism on social media. dealing with issues of corruption. I think that's the direction that journalism is going currently, which makes a huge difference. That journalists are not seeing ourselves as conveyor belts, but then as activists in society who have a role to play in shaping the journalistic space. In terms of those who mentored me, Elvis Kwashi, Erastus Sasaredonko are two individuals that I owe everything that I do in journalism today to. I started journalism at a very young age. I was less than 18 years. It was like 6 or 7 months to my 18th birthday in the newsroom of Capital Radio in Kumasi. That was in 2008. Erastus Sasaredonko was the editor there. I was virtually fresh from high school. Madam Judith Ajiman, who used to be the CEO of Capital Radio, who is passed on now, referred me to him. And Erastus was very keen and interested in, helping us all get better. He would pick me on his motorbike, ride me around. When he's stepping out there to then go get stories done, he would drop me off at home. Subsequently, he moved to a different radio station. He took me along and all of that. So those were very exciting moments in Kumasi. And then the real breakthrough came when I had the opportunity to do an internship at Joy FM. I was then in my second year reading agriculture at the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, and we had all repeatedly told ourselves that we would want to have the opportunity to work at Joy FM, because then, of course, we had all seen all the big things that the other journalists were doing there. And then one day I heard on the radio, I think it was Kojo Nkrumah, who was then the host of the Super Morning Show, giving a shout out to Elvis Kwashi, his managing editor. He was never on radio, so not a lot of people knew him. I took down his name on one of those days when I traveled to Accra. I showed up at the front desk and said I was looking for Elvis Kwashi. I said I was looking for Elvis Kwashi. They asked me, do I have an appointment? I said no. They asked, is he expecting me? I said no. They asked me, is the reason for the visit official? I said it's semi-official. And then they said I should wait. I waited for like 30 minutes. Then he stepped out there and asked, what's up? What are you looking for? And in that conversation, I told him, yes, I've had a bit of journalism experience, but I'm reading agriculture now. School is going on break in a few months, so I would want the opportunity for an internship. And he said his newsroom was full as at the time that we were having the conversation. But for me, having the confidence to have showed up without any form of referral and coming to engage him and being that brave, he thinks he'll give me the opportunity. And so I should go when school goes on break. I should come back and begin the internship. And as they always say, the rest of the story is what we've seen unfold.
Bless his soul.
Yeah.
Elvis,
Yeah.
authentic, genuine person.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah. This is Springboard, your virtual university. My guest, Joseph Opoku Gakpo, telling us about the story of his life, the milestones, and how he got to specialize in agriculture and how he got into the multimedia group, among others. He's talked about those he advanced, those who mentored him, and he's also talked about the fact that there are critical success factors for doing well as a journalist, and that is continuous learning, and continuous learning. Let's settle on your area of interest, agriculture. How big is agriculture in the developmental conversation of Africa, from where you sit?
Obviously, it's the most important equation, whether we are trying to then create a better society, lift people out of poverty, ensure that people don't go to bed hungry. Developing the agricultural space is what will be the way forward in that regard. So currently, the estimation is that about 10% of the world population go to bed hungry each night, around 850 million plus people. In Africa, the figures are around 20% of the entire population in terms of those facing situations of hunger. So that alone is a straightforward indication that there are a lot of opportunities there because people would have to be fed one way or the other. There are a lot of gaps in terms of how we practice agriculture, which is actually part of how come I got interested in pursuing higher learning that focuses on agricultural education and agricultural extension. Because I recall my first visit to the US, that was in 2016 to Cornell University. We had the opportunity to be out there to then go see some farms in that area. And I was a bit shocked to then hear that, for example, when you pick the average farm in the US on 1 hectare of a cornfield, they are having productivity levels to the extent that they're able to produce up to 11.5 metric tons of corn from just 1 hectare. Guess how much on the average in Ghana we're able to produce when it comes to corn on 1 hectare? It's just 1.5.
Wow.
So the difference is huge. The gentleman farming in Ghana is getting 1.9 metric tons of corn from his field. The guy in the US is getting 11.5 metric tons. The person who is breeding cattle in the US is able to get 7 gallons of milk from each cow every day. Here in Africa, we are doing less than 1 gallon per day on the average. So there's that huge gap that conscious efforts need to be made in order to then fix. The role of technology in doing that cannot be underestimated. And obviously, those that technology excites and those who will be able to then have the confidence to try new things to then possibly make a difference in agriculture here in Africa are the young people. And if we get a bit more of them into the space and they get ready to apply their ingenuity to then get things done, I think agriculture will make a bigger difference in how we improve Africa as a continent.
The program you're on, the Ghana Growth Program, is looking at just the entire value chain, not just from the production side, but the processing, the learning of it, the teaching of it, the art of it, the journalism of it, just so that we can explore the full length of the value chain. And one of the things that we are dealing with is the mindset that people have about agriculture. Obviously, for something that you would consider a no-brainer, why should we be even trying to convince somebody to explore a career in it? And the answer is very simple, because it has been made to look as unattractive as possible, either by policy or by our historical antecedents. How do we crack this code and make it the go-to place for every young person?
So, very key point about exposing young people to what the opportunities actually look like, because people are growing produce in Ghana, exporting to Europe, earning pounds and earning euro and earning dollars from doing that export. There are individuals who do just gathering the stuff and selling. They are probably not doing the farming on their own, but that's what they do and they are making good money from it. Some others are involved in introducing some advanced technology in the farming practices. Some have a business model that says we will disseminate information on what weather patterns look like and what the market looks like in the agricultural space to farmers, so they have that appropriate information to be able to then take decisions on when to plant and when to send their produce to market. And that's the entire business model in terms of what they are doing within the agricultural value chain, and they are making good money from it. They don't have to be out there on the field doing any specific farming activities. There are people who are doing plant breeding and working in the labs, whether in a university or at research stations, and then they go ahead and improve upon the crop and get it to the field to then develop. And, when I was a child, one of the things that excited all of us about wanting to get into medical practice was the fact that the doctors would have this white thing that they would wear overall, and it was very much attractive. Agriculturalists working in the lab as plant breeders are also doing similar stuff in terms of wearing white attires like that, just as the medical doctors. So the
visuals must support the message.
Very necessary, very necessary. So particularly in a lot of rural areas and even in a lot of our schools, where the whole concept of what the agricultural value chain looks like is just getting to the farm and producing stuff. We need to get that message out there to those other people and getting them to then see the other opportunities. I make the point that We have almost 50% of our population in Ghana involved in agricultural production specifically. In other places in Africa, it's up to 80%. We don't exactly need more human beings, because then if we need more human, then it looks like we want 100% of people involved in farming in Africa, which is not what we are all hoping for. But the point is, a lot of other opportunities exist along the value chain, whether in processing, whether in information dissemination, whether in marketing the produce, and all of that, that young people should be encouraged to explore additionally.
Awesome. So as we have this conversation, Joe, really, if you Google right now a farmer in Ghana, the picture that you will see is a torn pair of trousers. And how do we change the imagery such that the person who, because the visuals, right from the scriptures, the visuals play a very important role in people making decisions. How do we change the imagery? How do we change even the perception around school farms and everything to make the young person see, that's what I want to do?
The work you're doing with Ghana Grows obviously sits very much in that domain in terms of trying to then let people see what exactly is available within the agricultural value chain. But then earlier you were asking me about mentorship. That's also very much key in that space. I know a number of farmers who are not these poor with torn clothing walking about and all. I know farmers who make good money, drive big cars. The 2008 national best farmer, Davis Kobo, who lives not too far from here.
Great friend.
Okay,
yes. That's show, yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, fantastic guy. Done agriculture for God knows how many years, made good money from that. And there are numerous examples of that. We have stories about people who work in the bank, who are also involved in agriculture as people who are financing agriculture, and they'll tell you stories about how majority of the money that they are making is actually not from sitting in the banking hall, but
I found out when I went to Tamale.
Okay.
They told me, listen, from here all the way to the upper east, upper west, all the farms are owned by these people in Accra, but they would never tell you. I was shocked.
Yeah. So
they showed me people's the size of their plantations, and they mentioned the names, and I was like, oh, okay. Yeah. The person is speaking big English on so the money is coming from the farm.
So it's easy to see that individual and assume that the money is probably coming from the work in the bank or the work in the university or the work as
or even the politics.
Media or even the politics. Exactly. However, for all you know, a substantial amount of the money is actually coming from all the farming activities that they are doing in the north or elsewhere.
Let's end on the power of storytelling. How important is storytelling, not just for the agricultural sector, but in our quest to build a good society? How powerful is storytelling as a tool to galvanize society towards the ideals that we are looking for?
From old, it's always been stories being passed on from one generation to the other. We'll read storybooks and all of that from years ago, and even during childhood, that talks about people sitting by the fireside. And it was all about the storytelling bit. That's how smart ideas, that's how the good things from the past get passed on from generation to generation. But then storytelling also provides the opportunity to then discuss the ideas for the future, what the plans going forward are, what the big vision that we're aiming at that we haven't achieved yet would actually look like. It's all certainly goes back to storytelling. And so that's a very important component. I would usually make the argument that even when it comes to the work that a lot of institutions do, whether in the developmental space or even when it comes to business generally, the communication component is usually not prioritized as much as getting the work done. However, telling the story, doing the appropriate branding, having experts who understand the space, helping direct the packaging, the packaging of the business or the packaging of the personality or the packaging of the idea, that's also very much crucial. So I get the sense we are getting more excited about that these days thanks to social media and people taking time to tell their own story on social media and all. And so prioritizing that is obviously necessary going forward.
What should we expect from you going forward as we wrap up this one? What should we look forward to in the soon to become Dr. Joseph Opoku Gakpo? What should we expect? What are the aspirations?
The future, to a large extent, is in the hands of God, as we would say. But as Dr. Mensa Otabo said in church a few days ago, you want to leave things in the hands of God, but you begin first by planning for the future and then committing what the plans are to God, although God has his own plans for you as well. So, looking forward to finishing my education, hopefully sometime next year. A lot of ideas are running all over the place in terms of what the future would look like. So we wait to see what happens. But one of the things that always keeps me going is advice that I had from an old friend of mine, Suleiman Okoth, who is a Kenyan. He used to work with the African Agricultural Technology Foundation. Suleiman sat me down in a conversation one day and said, Joseph, you need to learn to reinvent yourself every once in a while. So he told me, it's okay to be in a business or to work at a specific place and work there for 10 years or 20 years or even 30 years. And he made the point that even in academia, professors have taught for 30, 40 years and all. But then his main point was that every 5 to 10 years, find a way to reinvent yourself. And that would come in different forms. Every 5 to 10 years, make sure you are either pursuing an additional degree. If you are working as a journalist in a newsroom in Accra, maybe you can take time off and say, let me go work in a newsroom in Kumasi and see how things work. Like, can I probably apply for something must move, because when people see you 24/7, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, chances are that the human consciousness will create a situation where you get a bit of a bit stale in their minds, and also every once in a while reinvent yourself. And so what I look forward to is reinventing myself going forward. Then I'm very clear in my mind on that I would want to do that, but I'll leave the specifics to God.
Interestingly, the same submission on reinvention I heard from Pastor Mensa Otabo, and he used 3 to 5 years. So maybe let's say that initially, in a less disrupted world, it was 5 to 10 years, but now we're looking probably at 3 years to 5 years at most. A bit of reinventing, remodeling, reshaping to stay relevant in a rapidly changing world. Thank you so much, Joe, for making time to join us.
Thank you, Reverend. It's been a pleasure sitting down with you for a conversation.
As always. Joseph Opoku Gakpo has been my guest on Springboard, your virtual university, in a quest to find ourselves, talk journalism, and then also talk about agriculture as the key to Africa's developmental question. It's been very insightful. Let's continue this conversation on social media as we explore which of the pillars, the points he made, resonates with you the most. Mine, for me, is that altruistic outlook on life that is not just about money, but about societal impact with the work that he does. That's how he's been all the years that I've known him. And that's what I admire about him. And then also, interestingly, in that particular award that we mentioned, Heroes of Change, it was yourself, Manasseh, and Seth Kwame Boateng. 3 people that I know are selfless in the work that they do and committed to make the world a better place. May the Lord himself, who you love and serve, make Ghana become the Ghana that you always dream about and pray about. This has been Springboard, your virtual university. My name is Albert Ocran. On behalf of our team here at the Springboard Roadshow Foundation, our sponsors, MTN Ghana and the Enterprise Group, and our partners, the Multimedia Group and the Graphic Communications Group, saying God bless you, and God bless you.